Yeah, we're live. It's 8:14. I'm back from the movies. Went to see The Machine. Bert. I love that story. Tonight we're going to talk about roller rockers and specifically LS roller rockers because roller rockers on any other application that doesn't already have a factory roller rocker like the LS, probably more of a difference. So you go from a stamped steel rocker like on an old small block Chevy, small block Ford, and go to a roller. And then like if you go to a full roller where you have a roller fulcrum where the rocker pivots and then a roller tip also where it slides on the valve, that's obviously the best of both worlds because you're getting rid of friction. You're getting rid of friction in two major places. They also have steps in between that. They have rockers that are essentially like your factory stamped steel small block Chevy or small block Ford with just a roller tip. I think that the Magnum rockers or something, or the high tech ones, or some Comp had some stuff like that were just the tip was a roller. So that's one way. Then you also have like the factory LS1 or other rockers. You have where the fulcrum, where the rocker pivots, you have that being a roller portion and then a slider tip. That's also another one. And then, like I said, then you can have one of either one of those, or you can have both of them and then have it be a full roller. So the question is, and this is why when people talk to me about LS stuff, Richard, should I put roller rockers on it? Because we've been throwing roller rockers, at you for years and years and years for all the small block Chevy, small block Fords, big blocks, all that stuff. You got to put roller rockers on it, and honestly, it is a good upgrade for all those earlier motors. Get rid of the stamped steel stuff and put rollers on it. Heck, even if you just take the factory stamped steel rocker and put a poly lock on it, it's a big step up so that it doesn't loosen up with those silly jam nuts. But roller rockers were usually a thing that you would do on especially performance applications on these earlier motors. But when they introduced the LS, and they did this in other families too, the 3800 V6 is a perfect example of that. Very rocker, very similar to the LS, same kind of roller fulcrum. And then you're getting the friction sliding on the valve. But how much do you get there? Probably not very much. The roller fulcrum, in my opinion, is where most of the frictional gain or loss you would be there. And then sliding on the tip, you've got oil on it. And we always put oil on that before we assemble it, but it gets oil on it while it's running. So I think that not a lot of gain is there, but there are some things to talk about there because we've had people say, oh, no, it's only the roller fulcrum in the frictional thing in the discussion about frictional losses. Or it's only the ratio. That's the only thing that gains power is the ratio from the rocker. It's like saying it's only the lift that gains power on a camshaft. It's only the duration. It's only the tight LSA. It's only the overlap period. It's only the fifth, fifth element or whatever, which by the way, excellent movie. So right off the bat, my consensus is that when somebody says, this is the only thing that matters on whatever discussing, camshafts, rockers, cylinder heads, whatever it is. Right off the bat, it's easy for me to say, no, that's not the case. Because even if the other things were if that thing was 99% and the other things made up 1%, it's still not 100%. So it's pretty easy to kind of squash those and say, no, there's lots of things. That doesn't mean something isn't, has more of an effect. But like with the camshaft stuff, you can't single out, well, lift doesn't matter. Well, it does. Duration doesn't matter. It does. Overlap doesn't matter. It does. It's all about overlap. Doesn't matter what the duration is. No, it does. If you have overlap on a 190, 195 cam or a 190, 210 cam or whatever, and then you have overlap on a 260, 270 cam, those cams are going to act differently. Even if the overlap that you got on those two was the same, they're going to be wildly different camshafts. And so I had that discussion with somebody about that. No, if it has 8 degrees of overlap, it's going to be the same. I'm like, okay. And the roller rocker is the same thing. No, it's all just ratio. So if we took the roller portion out of it and just made it a stamped steel rocker with no roller on the tip or on the fulcrum, you're saying that it would do the same thing. That's not accurate. The other thing is there, and I mentioned this on the description for this video, And that's that there are lots of things to consider when we're talking about this. So the first of all, on an LS, it already has a roller fulcrum, and actually it has a very, very good rocker design, because not only is it a roller fulcrum, which that's good in and of itself, but the rest of the design, the rocker is fairly stout. Guys have run them to 8,500 on race motors all the time. It has a you'd have to go through and mark this out, and this is one of the questions: does it have a true ratio all the way through the lift range? And then here's the other thing that a lot of guys don't know is when you've designed that rocker, you might have a fairly true ratio in a given arc, because this rocker was designed for camshafts that are 190 degree, or have 190 degree duration camshafts and have less than 500 lift cams. In some of the cases, some of these are bigger than that, 550 lift cams, but that might be the limit of where they're good at. So one of the things I brought up on the roller rocker comparison is, what if the roller rocker has, because people were talking about ratios. I said, well, if the stock rocker is 1.7 and the roller rocker is 1.7, but because of then positioning and design, it's 1.7 through the whole sweep. And the stock rocker is only 1.7 through 39% of the sweep. And then it varies all over, usually not more, sometimes less, whatever. So then what you'll be doing is you'll be making the camshaft different by doing that. In the same way that when we change the ratio, you're changing the ratio. And you can do that because of the design of the rocker. You can also do that because of the ratio of the rocker. So if we go from a 1.7 to a 1.8, theoretically, we increase lift and a little bit of duration. And that effectively makes the camshaft bigger. Excuse me, but if you take some of that away because of the arc of the rocker doesn't stay true to a 1.7 through the whole lift range, it's not a 1.7. It's something else. It's about a 1.7, or sometimes a 1.6, sometimes a 1.58 or whatever. And so that's another thing to consider. So there's lots of stuff. There's whatever the listed ratio is, whatever the actual ratio is during the, as we go through the lift range of that particular cam. How much are we multiplying? Is it staying true to that same multiplication number? Is it fixed all the way through? Does the rocker go, like in the case of the stock rocker of an LS, it's fairly good for 600 lift stuff. If you try to go to 700 lift stuff, it's not that great. It's going to sweep its way basically off of the tip of the valve, or point load it. It's just not a good combination for that. The other thing to think about is, are we side loading the valve because of that? Because of the way that the rocker tip is working on the valve, are we side loading the valve or pushing it into the guide? All of these things are considerations, and they're not much of a consideration when the motor's stock, because guess what? The engineers from GM did a good job designing that. But when we make dramatic changes in camshaft, when we go up 30 or 40 degrees of duration, and we go up from 480 or 490 or even 500 lift to 600 plus lift, it makes a difference on what the camshaft is doing. It makes a difference on what the rocker is doing. So we've thrown the thing out of whack, and that it still works as well as it does. And we've seen guys, like I said, run these factory rockers to lots and lots of power and lots of RPM and still have them work. So when people ask me, do you recommend them? I've tested roller rocker. In fact, excuse me. In fact, I tested this test way early on in my LS testing career. This was one of the first motors that we put on the engine dyno. This wasn't the first test, but it was this motor that we started out with. Is Tom, who worked at Westech. We finally got an LS going at Westech years ago before anybody had run one there, and they had two of them sitting there and they'd never run them. So we said, you know what? They've been sitting there a long time. It's time we ran one. And then the rest is history. But using this, we were able to run all of this testing. And obviously, because I came from the background of lots and lots of small block Chevy stuff, some small block Ford stuff, big block stuff, all that, you have to put roller rockers on there. I know that these rockers look like they're obviously better than the stock small block Chevy ones, but they're not full roller rockers. So you got to put roller rockers on, because we put roller rockers on everything. Right? Yes, we do. So we put roller rockers on. The first thing we do is like go into tremendous valve flow. We're like, oh, we got to put springs on them. And then we go from a stock spring to another Beehive, a 26.918 comp spring. We're like, nice. look, we were able to get 600 more 600 more RPM or whatever. We're still getting into valve float. So we didn't have to put a spring on it. We had to put, springs on it. And that's where we learned that. And I don't know that I'm not sure that the gain offsets that. One of the interesting things for the guys that are out there saying that it's only rocker ratio, when we put 172 rockers on the 383 that I did that made 600 horsepower, and they offered a pretty measurable power gain. And so going from a 1.7 to a 1.72. So, but the thing is, we didn't degree it, and I didn't see what the actual ratio was. So maybe we got a true 1.7 or maybe a true 1.72. And so maybe the average was more than that, and the change was more than that ratio. But I don't think I don't think it's just the rocker ratio change. I think that there's other things that are coming into play there. And we had enough valve spring that we had a dual valve spring on that thing where we didn't get into valve float, at least not in the RPM range that we were running this thing as, because this was it was a sub 7,000 RPM motor and probably a sub 66 or 6,700 RPM motor. But having experienced all of that stuff with the valve float early on, and if you're just doing a roller rocker thing, that's okay. And the reason that I put this test up there is because I get lots and lots of questions about, we do camshaft stuff all the time. Well, Richard, what if we just, because we know these things like cams, we know these things even like small cams, like a torque Brian Tooley Racing torque cam. We know that they like torque cams. We know that if we put another stock cam, it will gain power. So what if we just did a rocker ratio change or a roller rocker change with a different ratio? Yeah, you can do that. And I showed you what happens when you do that. It will make a bit more power. We put 185s on this because that's just what comp had at the time. It probably wouldn't have been my choice. And the ones that we used were the stainless steel ones were super heavy back in the day, but those required guide plates and all that stuff. And that would not be my choice for an LS, but back then that's what we had, and that's what we had to try. And it did gain power, mostly because the LS motor, since we had a stock camshaft in it, it wanted more camshaft. Anytime we threw any kind of a camshaft in an LS, no matter what it was, it definitely gained power. So it wanted more camshaft. And the same thing with the 5.3, it definitely, because it had the smallest camshaft, at least the LS1 had a little bit of cam in it, because an LS1 cam is definitely worth power over an LM7 camshaft. But on the 5.3 with the LM7 cam, it responded to rocker ratio when I tested that. And then it also, in the video that I put up, responded to rocker ratio with the LS7 cam that came factory with a 1.8 rocker on the LS7 heads. And this one was showing power gains before we ran into valve float, and I just didn't cure it. Maybe another rocker test is in order where we actually have enough valve spring to run the thing so that it doesn't go into valve float, and so we can run the rocker all the way up like it's supposed to be. But I think what we're going to see is like what we saw in the LS. We were able to run that thing to 6,000 or 6,100, which was at or past the power peak already. So we know that it was going to do it. It was going to be on the downside of the curve, but it could have continued to RPM out further. The reason that I recommend the factory stuff is it just works. You just bolt it on there and it all works as long as you have the push rod length right, and if you put a camshaft in, it didn't change the base circle of the cam. If you're changing the rockers, you're gonna have to adjust some of that stuff too. So our poll will be, okay, Motown Philly. I think rocker ratio is what changes the power and not a change in friction on a roller rocker swap. We're going to throw in LS roller rocker swap. So that should be pretty yes or no, right? Okay, Now I'll scroll back up, see if I can get going. Your paycheck came in today. That's good. Why would I lose power to my 1984 Mustang fuse box? Does it have a is there an inline fuse that's that in the big wire that supplies power to the fuse box? Or do you have a ground that's off? Off subject, is it better to have a turbo with a high or low AR? It depends on what you're trying to do with the turbo. Justin, you ditched your 351 Windsor and found a 460 big block. It will definitely make a lot more torque. Richard, what's up to the 396? It's not back together yet. Michael, instead of talking about the AR ratio on your turbo, you need to talk about what turbo size you're getting. That's the big thing. The AR is a very small thing. How much horsepower can an LQ9 produce without boost? Or can we add nitrous? A cam, springs, and head LQ9 stock short block is sub 600 horsepower at the flywheel. The 460 on a budget. I'm talking budget. Does it pay to upgrade the cam lifters? Yes, that's going to be the single biggest thing that you could do to make power. I went from 1.6 to 1.7 on my 455 volts and picked up 24 horsepower. That's a lot. What a consensus on the LS7 engine. I don't know what you mean by that. They had problems with valve guides, maybe, or seats. Single S480, and you wanted to make, you're not going to make 1400 on an S480. Richard recently purchased a rebuilt L3353. Nice. Go with the Cadillac blower. I'm going to put ring gap and realize installed pistons 10 to 1 with 243 heads. A rating 85 kind of get away with boost. Yeah, very easily. From Richard's vids and chats, I'm just doing a trunnion upgrade on a BTR Advanced LS1 rockers. That's a good idea to do a trunnion upgrade, especially on high mileage stuff. What's up with the Chrysler? You're going to compare a slider cam to a roller cam? I am going to try that as soon as we get that thing working. I have an LS6 intake with heads, cam, long tube headers. How much more power would a fast get me? Somebody probably put 15 horsepower or something like that. Admiral's out. Yeah, it is late. The poll didn't appear? It should have. Oh, no, it dang it. It didn't appear. Copy. Start poll. Paste. I think rocker ratio is what changes the power and not friction on an LS roller rocker swap. We will ask our community now. I don't know why I put it in there as a comment. See, I'm scrolling. How much power is lost in total friction in a typical V8 engine? Are we talking 1 to 2 horsepower or dozens of horsepower? How much is the frictional loss? It's way more than 1 or 2 horsepower. It's your duty to the country to hit the like button. Wow, super patriotic. How about identical duration cam test using flat mushroom? What? Who makes a mushroom cam anymore? And roller tappets each accelerating valve as fast as this design allows. That I honestly I don't have any interest in that at all, because it's not a question that anybody's asking. Nobody's deciding whether they should put a flat tappet in their LS. Nobody's asking that question. I'll have to email you to get a list of what I need to achieve what I'm looking to gain. So I need something bigger than an S480. For 1,400 horsepower, you need something bigger than an S480. Or a real Garrett turbo will do that. But they're going to be more money. Probably VS Racing has something, probably a 55 or something. Think of doing a 363 for my F-150. You're going to do that with a dart block then, right? Because you got to start out with a 4125 bore. 80 to 98 millimeters. That is big. An 88 millimeter will certainly do 1,400. The puppies are doing good. They're doing well. I took them for a run. We took them for a hike the other day, and we took them far enough where one of them just decided, I've had enough. I'm laying down. He didn't just stop. He stopped and then laid down and put his head down and everything. He was going to sleep right there. He said, I'm done. The other one wants to keep going. He's going to be my runner. He's going to run with daddy. All right, the LS1 internal is the same strength as the LMLQ. If the ring gap is proper, will they handle the same stock bottom end power? The internals will, but that block will not. I sent it so hard in the Grand Am that I broke a control arm. Nice. Which I modified to get the max horsepower on LQ9. If you want to get max horsepower, you have to modify everything. You could, I don't know if you could or I could, but there are people who could do way more than 1,000 horsepower on a naturally aspirated 6-liter motor. But to do that is very, 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 and there's a few more varies, and they're expensive to do that. And you have to be super sharp to get more than 2 horsepower per cubic inch, but more than 3. It's hard to do. Most guys, if you put heads cam and intake manifold on it, put flat top pistons with valve release so you can put enough camshaft in it and use the right intake manifold, 600 horsepower is doable. It's like 100 horsepower per liter. That's a realistic number. You could also make it bigger. You could make it a 408, and it's easier to get power, and you have more torque. How do we tell if rocker ratio stays consistent through the whole travel? You have to use a dial indicator on the valve. Planning on spraying 400 horsepower wet on a single plane EFI intake manifold with a dual stage Hornet 3 nitrous outlet plate on a 408. It would be good to get even distribution with this. I don't think you won't get even distribution with a single plane manifold. You could get if you tune it with that shot and you have 802s and you can dial in the air fuel mixture of each cylinder individually by using sequential injection, you can get the air fuel dialed in. But the intake manifold is still not going to have even power production, and not an even amount of nitrous is going to get to it, and an even amount of air is going to get to it. You could get an even amount of fuel, or the amount of fuel that you need for the amount of air and nitrous that you get to each one of them. But that intake manifold, the runners are different, so they're not going to perform the same through the whole RPM range. I've seen a test of Bush keyed 937 lifters versus roller bearing lifters back to back. It was worth 8 horsepower at 9,000 RPM on a 105 lift solid roller to give you an idea of friction losses. What was a Bush keyed 937 lifter versus a roller bearing lifter? What was the other lifter? Was it, you're not telling me it was a flat tablet lifter, right? Will an aluminum full roller rocker last on a daily driver? Yeah, the rocker itself should last without any problem. Shadow, that's a good point. The rocker will last if they're good ones. I don't know about some of the cheap offshore brands. Have I ever run a VR6? I have not. I don't think I've ever even run one of those on the engine dyno. I've run other Volkswagen stuff, but not a VR6. David Vizard could get good mixture distribution on anything. It's not hard with port injection to get the right. I have a video up on it already. If you have sequential port injection and you can adjust the fuel individually in each cylinder, and you have 802s to tell you what to do, that's actually very, very easy. But the point is that a single plane manifold, by its very design with its centrally mounted carburetor, has different length runners. And so the runners are going to want, like the longer runners are going to want a different amount of fuel to give you the air fuel mixture that you're trying to get. Let's say you're trying to get 12.5 to 1 through the whole curve. Well, those outer runners, the longer ones, are going to produce power at a different rate and in a different RPM range than the two center runners. So they will not produce the same power. They do not have good power distribution because of the intake design. And no amount of porting and manipulation can change that fact. That's just a fact of, that's one of the laws of physics. Is it a struggle for top fuel dragster guys to manage equal boost in each cylinder? I don't know. I wouldn't think that that's a problem. But I haven't looked into what the intake manifold design is and how they're feeding the air in. But, you know, there are guys that are a lot sharper than I am about that. How do I pose an off-subject question for you to answer sometime? There's no subject matter right now. You can ask whatever question that you want. And if I can answer it, I'll try. Or there might be somebody else here, lots of sharp guys here that can also answer it. One lifter has a bushing in the axle. The other was Jessel with a needle bearing. Okay. Soft tail manifolds are from a big, long plenum under the blower. Yeah, they don't have much runner length. I think that it's like a big common plenum deal with short runners in it. They're not worried about, extra torque production from runner length. They don't have a shortage of power production. They have a shortage of traction. Richard, do you have recommendations on forward-facing headers for a Gen 3 Hemi or in a Charger? I cannot for the life of me find anyone that has forward-facing headers for the Hemi or flanges. What we were going to do, and I never finished it, but we were just going to make plates and put LS headers on it because LS headers will bolt to the Hemi. The port spacing is really, really close. So if you made a flange and bolted those on and had the flange drilled for countersunk bolts that you could bolt the plate on, and so that it's all flush, and then it has another bolt pattern on it, and then you could just bolt an LS header onto it, it will work. I've already set it up there, and in fact, I already got another set of headers to do that. We just never completed it. Redhead or blue top steering gearbox and an OBS C1500 for anybody. I don't know the answer to that. Clutch guys make the best money. Yeah, I think the crew chief decides ultimately how much clutch they're going to put in that, and so that's part of their tune that they run. What's the safest way to spray 400 wet besides direct port? Well, a direct port would be definitely the best way to do it. Otherwise, spray if you can control it, spray it progressive and then spray it dry so that you add the fuel with the injectors if you can do that. Well, my stock LQ4 rockers last with 585 lift and 6,300 RPM. Yes. I've run 1.6 stamped and 1.716 rockers on small block Chevy rollers. Hydraulic lifters are more of an issue with a higher ratio rocker for a small block Chevy than an LS, in my opinion. Are you running these on hydraulic roller late model small blocks, or are you running them on flat tappet small blocks? Do any of you guys know what rear end ratio would be good for an 8th 900 to 1,000 crank horsepower? Danny, what's the transmission and what's the weight of the vehicle and all that? Flat tappets? I haven't seen the lifters be that much of a problem in a realistic RPM range. We don't normally run 1.7s on a small block Chevy. Normally a 1.52 or a 1.6. And people have asked me about that on the rocker stuff, and I'm like, well, honestly, I wouldn't. And the other reason on an LS that I wouldn't want to, I don't normally recommend rockers to put on there, is I would just put a cam in it. Then you have the lift and duration that you want with a cam, and you can use a stock rocker, which works really good, especially in this combination in this range of RPM and power output and lift and all the things. It's something that you don't really need to change. A hot mess. I don't think I would do studs that stick out. I would just have the plate be thick enough that you could bolt the headers to it, just with bolts going through the flange for the header. Now am I running the same issue of all Charger owners have the alternators in the way? Can't you use the stock exhaust manifolds and just run tubing forward? You don't have to have forward-facing headers to make it work, unless you want it because it looks good. Using a rocker with larger ratios is an old school trick to gain extra horsepower when camshafts are limited in class racing. Yeah, although I think that the tech guys would be savvy enough to pick that up. How's our poll doing? 77% are saying that yes, that they think the rocker ratio is what changes the power. Yeah, with the small block Chevys, they used to run the higher ratio long slot rockers because the amount that was pivoting, they needed a bigger slot in it. Melanized versus brass distributor gears. We've run both of them at West Tech, but I can't tell you about longevity of those. And are sure it's a brass gear, not a bronze gear. Most of the ones we use are bronze, I think. And I don't know what the life expectancy is of a bronze gear. I don't know that I would run that in a street car. I run 1.6 rockers and small blocks because the shelf grind roller cams don't have much lift. Yeah, a lot of them don't. Bronze gears, yeah. We tried the old carbon fiber gears too. .373 versus .342 gear on a 17x11 rim, 285 for good launch and drivability. What vehicle is that in? I changed my solid lifters out for hydraulic ones. Can I skip the lashing interval? Yeah, you don't have to change the lash after you put a half turn of preload in it and you tighten that down. As long as that thing doesn't back out, it's going to stay there. Danny, it's in a Silverado. It only has a 342 gear in it. A 373. It's not uncommon for those to have 4 series gears in them. You think anyone could win pro stock if they're willing to have one-use engines and the budget for it? Pro stock is a really hard thing to win, in my opinion. And the guys search for very, very little tiny amounts of power to get an advantage over the guys. Just got back from a 6 summer fail, cleaning the shop, and saw your YouTube. Justin, what's up? Did you go to sick week? Is that what you're saying? And what was the fail? Did something break? Uh, 1051. If you want to run roller rockers on LS, I suspect you need 440 to 460 open spring pressure to keep everything and checking out how the valve float. Then the problem becomes: do you wear the lifters out by having that much spring pressure? That's also something to think about. I put an LS9 4100. Is it a 4100 stroke? Oh, 55 head gaskets. Compression is reading only 90 across the cylinders. If you have 90 psi cranking compression, that's not enough. Unless you have a gigantic camshaft in it. Part of my weekend ritual was lashing my valves because I daily drove the car. Yeah, see, for a daily driver, I would not ever put solid anything kind of camshaft in it. that might be something that I would do, if you're trying to drag race or whatever, and you're trying to go for every last bit of power. But the drivability is very important to get in the car and drive around. Richard, how often do you do these live streams? I try to do them every night. How do you choose the right rocker ratio? Well, luckily, the factory has chosen that for you, or given you an idea of where it should be already. So 1.5 on a small block Chevy, 1.6 on a small block Ford, 1.7 on an LS, on a big block, 1.7, 1.73 Cleveland stuff. That's why I like to stay with the stock rocker ratio and then just put the right camshaft in it. But rocker ratio is also something that you could play with, as I showed you in this video, to gain a little bit more power for other things, for other applications. Is 8th Mile Chicago Shootout do your own dial-in popular in the States? Is that something that's popular somewhere else? Because Chicago Shootout sounds like it's US based. Oh, Justin, radiator sprung leak. That's not good, man. Sorry to hear it. My C1500 is 342. I was thinking about doing 373s, but my mechanic friend said it's not necessary. Does the car feel sluggish off the line right now, or the truck? Well, an S4E turbo spool adder before 3,000 RPM and a 550 horsepower LS 408 or small block Ford? Yes. We do need revs. We need the de-stroker motors for with lots of rod ratio, with really long rods, so we can get the RPMs up. That's all lifters and many imports that last forever. Yeah, but the thing is, like, even on the Honda, driving either the single cam or twin cam B series or K series stuff, ask me how often I ever check the lash on those. It definitely wasn't the weekend thing. It was let's just see. We're taking the valve cover off for something else. Yes, it's still 6 and 8 or whatever. What intake manifold would you say is best for wet nitrous? I don't know. Like we were talking about before, the intake manifold, the fact that it flows and the nitrous can get in there, almost any intake manifold works with wet nitrous. If you have fogger nozzles going into each cylinder, that works pretty good. But there is a limitation to how much nitrous you could put into, from plates. Guys use that, but if you're trying to go make a lot of power, a fogger system is really good. Which I have a fogger system. If anybody's interested, I have a couple of plates that are like the crosshair plates. I have a couple of those, a couple of nitrous systems, and stuff to make a port fogger injection. If anybody's interested, if you are, just send me an email. I have a whole new setup for it. Continuing the cylinder pressure question, I'm using the sloppy best cam 219. A 219 cam should not have it shouldn't change the cranking compression hardly any at all from stock. Was that guy asking about putting hydraulic lifters on a solid lifter cam? I thought he was talking about hydraulic rollers on a solid roller cam. Can someone get this man a Ford 300? Getting a Ford 300 is not the problem. Getting the time and money and dyno availability to run them and do a bunch of stuff on it, along with all the other things that I already have to do that. The time element is the problem. Popular in Australia. Cool. Is it possible to increase valve train stability by going to a smaller rocker ratio? Yes and no. The ratio change by itself wouldn't always be linked to increased stability, but I remember seeing some Spintron data from Brian at Brian Tooley Racing, and they were doing some Spintron testing on the 1.8 LS7 rocker, and it's not good. It was not great. Richard still hold track records in stock car, in pro stock? Stock car was tough to win, pretty much everyone. Unless you're Steve Moore's running nitrous. Nice. Have you ever used Crowder stainless steel shaft rockers? I don't think I have. I'm trying to remember back if I ever saw any of those when Brule was running some of the motors on the dyno, but I don't know. The only time I can remember using Crowder stuff was we tried them. I want to say it was on an LS maybe, if I remember right, but it only have been one time, and it wouldn't have been on a big block. Uh, 187. The tune and converter can definitely affect the way that the thing launches. So you may be trying to cure something with gear ratio that's not a gear ratio. Now, the gear ratio change is definitely going to improve things. But if it has no timing or it has too much fuel or the converter's not doing what it's supposed to on the launch, that could be something else. I need to check the lash on my Trail 90. Two more minutes. Shadow Airman going to turn the RPMs up on the Pontiac. Whole 7,000 to 8,000 super stock stall. Nice. That's a lot of RPM. And they've discussed this a million times. What's the max duration lift a stock bottom end 5.3 will take with 862 heads? It has nothing to do with lift, so it's not that. The duration, anything, and it's not just duration because it's also LSA, and so it's an actual valve event. But anything in the 230 or more at 50 range on the intake side, because that's what's going to hit first, I would measure. Although now people have been commenting about it a lot. I want to run one of the sloppy stage 3 cams now. So I'm going to contact the guys at Elgin and see, maybe I should do a sloppy stage 1, 2, and 3 test for Elgin, and we'll see what the 5.3 does. That way, if we can put a sloppy stage 3 in it, we could see if the 5.3 is going to make good power. Would you limit RPM with roller rockers lower than standard rockers? It depends on where we got into valve float. Yeah, I think Steve Morris knows how to make power. Everything that I've seen seems to indicate that. He's a guy I'd like to reach out to. I'd like to talk to Steve. So we'll end our poll. 74% are on the rocker ratio page. LQ9, 243 heads. Sloppy stage 2 cam. Are you saying you have an LSA supercharger on it too? Because the LSA is going to determine how much power you make, however fast you spin that relative to engine speed. Yes, it had a stockish looking wheels before it could launch better. That's the real culprit. So did you change because the tire diameter and the wheel weight and all that definitely will have an effect on launch. So that's definitely something to consider. I'm amazed that when we see the trophy trucks run on the chassis down at West Tech when they're doing the tuning, getting them ready to send them out into the desert and do crazy stuff with them. I'm surprised at how much power they lose from the engine dyno to being in that because of the drivetrains that they use. The transmission, the drive shaft, the rear end, and definitely the wheel and tire package, which are, they're super hefty. Do a sloppy cam test on a 6.0. Already know 2 and 3 are too much for a 5.3. I disagree. I think 2 and 3 are like a 228 cam on a 5.3 is definitely within the range of guys wanting to make power. And I want to see if a 3 will fit in a 5.3. And guys will also want to know how much power it makes. I don't have a 6.0 to test it on right now, so it would definitely be that L33. The LSA blower, I don't know what speed you're running the blower on, so I don't have a way to guess that. Justin, thank you very much. Completely different width and diameter. Yeah, tire size can change a lot. I remember doing and yours will be the last question. I remember doing the testing with tire and wheel stuff on, we did it on Hondas and I did it on my Toyota Yaris. And because we put big, I don't know, 18s or 19s or something on that thing from TRD, and they looked really cool. It made the car, because we put springs and sway bars, all kinds of stuff. It was all lowered. It was red. It looked all fancy. But man, it took power away. The thing felt really a lot more sluggish with that tire and wheel package on there than it did with the factory stuff. And I'm like, wow, that's a big change. I'm going to have to do that test on the chassis dyno. So we took it over to my buddy Steve at Powertrain Dynamics down in Huntington Beach, and we ran it, and we just did a back-to-back swap of the tire and wheel. And I wish I had access to that data to his computer. I don't have that stuff. But it was a pretty fair bit. I want to say that it was like 8 horsepower or something at the tire. It was quite a bit, which is a lot on a Yaris that's only making, I don't know, 80 or 90 or something at the tire. It was a pretty big percentage. And on that note, it is time to go. So if you have not, please go check out the video that I just posted on the roller rocker change. And we did it on 2 motors. I did it on the LS1. So for all you Australia guys, there's the guys complaining about you never do the actual LS1, the 5.7. So this is a test on that. And then we also did it on the 5.3. And I will see you guys all tomorrow. Bam, 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 bam.